Just by background, a little history, what was the economic situation in Germany after World War One, between the two wars?
It was terrible. It was not good. Germany was on the verge of bankruptcy. Um, in the early 1920s, they had financed World War One with the so-called war bonds, which basically all of the middle classes had put their savings in, and of course, following and they had banked on the German Empire being successful in World War One and winning. Of course, after losing World War One and the draconian measures of the Treaty of Versailles being imposed on Germany, the war bonds became useless, it became worthless. And at the same time, hyperinflation ensued, billion billion mark um, notes were being printed by the German central bank, and hyperinflation was only stymied by the introduction of a new currency. But for the main characters in my book, it's actually when they accumulated their initial wealth. Because for speculators, for investors, who had a lot of material assets, it was actually a very profitable time because they could invest their money in stocks, and stocks were this kind of in this no man's land between liquid and illiquid assets, and they did all, and because just your average consumer investor would flee the market, and prices would get so depressed, they would snap up companies for on the cheap. So that was, I'd say, the period 1918 2022. Of course, 7 years of prosperity followed, and then 1929, October 1929, Black Thursday, the wipeout of Wall Street, the start of the Great Depression. A lot of German companies had financed their expansions with American bonds, or had heavily invested in the stock market, also in Wall Street, and were completely wiped out. But as a result, also just millions of Germans ended up being unemployed, and that was really the start of you see in September 1930 the Nazi Party coming in as the second largest party in German parliament out of nowhere, right? Because for 5 years, since it was turning from kind of a national socialistic movement into a political party, between 1925 and 1930, there was no success. Basically, they didn't have any electoral success. But on their platform of railing against the Jews, against the communists, even against the capitalists, between I would say early 1930 and the fall of 1930, a campaign run by Joseph Goebbels, later the infamous Nazi minister of propaganda, they were able to capitalize on this discontent within the German public, and suddenly, out of nowhere, became Germany's second largest party. Subsequently, that also opened the door for Hitler and the Nazi Party to first get contacts with Germany's big business community, because Germany's businessmen, like the successful industrialists and financiers, they were establishment conservatives. They backed establishment candidates, conservative candidates, like the sitting president von Hindenburg. They found Hitler and the Nazi Party fringe, total fringe movement, these garish, boorish, kind of impoverished characters from the hinterlands, from the German hinterlands, not to be taken seriously. But, when they suddenly gained massive electoral success, German business was like, oh, well, maybe there's something here. And Hitler himself did not have any kind of meaningful contacts to German business community. So that really opened the door. But they did not start supporting Hitler until after he had seized power in late January 1933. That's when they implicitly and explicitly fell in line.